think anyone doesn't know this, but industrial's been really hot in the market. We've absorbed, I think we were talking, John, what was it, about 500 million square feet?
Yeah, close.
This year? Yeah, close. So land prices have escalated, and Stephanie will talk a little bit about that later, and demand has shown no signs of slowing, and CJ will tell us all about that demand. But I'm going to go through and introduce our lovely panelists. CJ is the founder and managing principal of NOYAK Capital and NOYAK Logistics Income REIT. It's a future forward investment fund targeting the next generation of logistics real estate. You've got, what, 40 years of commercial real estate experience, and there's a lot more on that. He covers logistics, cold storage, life science, healthcare, and parking structures. Did I get it all?
You did get it all, but you also aged me, so thank you.
Oh, I do what I can. I'm reading the bio you sent in. He founded NOYAK Capital as an investment management firm focused on alternative real estate and venture capital. He has degrees from Tufts University, the London School of Economics, and Harvard Business School. Stephanie Rodriguez, the one on the end, is the regional senior vice president for the state of Florida for Duke Realty. She leads and directs the leasing, property management, and marketing of its growing industrial portfolios in Central and South Florida. And who knows, maybe the Panhandle someday?
John hopes.
Right on.
John hopes. She's a graduate of Pennsylvania State University and a recognized leader in Florida real estate. John Morris, guy in the middle, he's a commercial real estate vet with more than 30 years of executive management experience. Did I get all those years in? 30?
It's all good.
Okay.
Only 7 more to go, though, just to be clear.
Oh, okay, and then you can, gotcha. Okay, only 7 more to go, and then he's on CJ's level of 4 decades. So he leads CBRE's Industrial and Logistics Division. He's the America's leader and executive managing director with the firm. He oversees more than 1,600 professionals in the Americas, and he's been collectively responsible for more than $72 billion of transactions of 2020. And that's with your 1,600 colleagues, I assume? That's
with all of those folks. That's right.
All right. So as you can tell, we have quite the experienced panel. So let's talk about industrial real estate. There's been a supply chain crisis that's impacted the U.S. industrial real estate, but how has it changed investment and development in this space? Stephanie, do you want to kind of lead us off in talking about what you're seeing on your end?
Sure. Are these on? Can you all hear me?
No, yeah,
I feel like I'm on Zoom.
There it is.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was on mute. I think we've seen a number of impacts from the supply chain distribution, from ground-up development. We're seeing scheduling impacts for our development projects. It's increasingly more difficult to get things like steel and roofing materials, so that's one that we're seeing just day to day in our business. And then we're seeing a lot of it with the demand. Our tenants are looking for more space because they don't want to have the just-in-time inventory. They need to stockpile their inventory because we're finding that containers aren't being offloaded in ports right now. There aren't enough berths when they get piled up out there, so they're just lingering outside of ports. And then when they get to the ports, they don't have truck drivers to bring them to the warehouses. So there are a lot of different factors that are impacting our customers, and we're seeing a real uptick in demand of our current customers looking for additional space in the markets now because of that.
Is there a good rule of thumb, like they're looking for 10% more, 20% more? How big are these footprints getting?
I would say, just in general across the country, and John might even have some stats about this, but it's almost like people need twice what they once needed. But I would say safely, what we're seeing in our customers in Florida is roughly 15 to 20% more right now. So a tenant that may want to renew their lease at the moment, they might be coming to us and saying, you know what, we want to renew, but we really think we need 30,000 more square feet of space, which then you have to shuffle the deck chairs to see if you can fit them in somewhere else in the portfolio.
Right, right. John, what are you seeing from tenants? Where are they looking to expand? If they need double their footprint, where are they going?
Yeah, so what Stephanie pointed to there is the growth of the business. Our leasing business is up 64% this year. Now, some of that is because the prices are higher, right? And on average, rental rates are up 10.5%. That's pretty good. But it also so happens that Over-the-road freight is up 45, 50%. Container costs are up 150%. Warehouse labor is up 6%. Everything is more expensive. And it sounds crazy to say this, but inflation and supply chain is actually not a bad thing for industrial real estate. Two things to cite there. First is that a company's average logistics costs are 50 to 70% transportation. They're 5 or 6% rent, right? So the factors that are going up more significantly are the ones that those tenants have to try to fix. And the way you fix that is by adding facility space to your network so that you can hold more items, which everyone needs more of right now, but also so that you can take miles out of your network. The way to counteract rising transportation costs is to have more buildings so that your average distance to customer goes down. So one of the big drivers of growth of industrial this year has actually been the broken supply chain and the cost involved.
Go ahead, CJ.
Well, I was going to comment just that so I have a different perspective from my two panelists, in that we are an owner, investment, and diversified definition of logistics. So that's the delivery and service of any good. So that could be content production in studios, or it could be dry boxes and regional intermodal transport and storage. I feel from an investment and an ownership and a management point of view, Duke being a size, they may not notice these ripples in the water, but when you couple what John described, which is good ostensibly for industrial rents and tenancy, when you couple that with the low accommodative monetary policy and the ridiculously low interest rates, you get land costs that are off the charts. So then the land costs, and then the building inflation, of course, of the materials that will require to build, they go up. Then you have a basis as an owner like Duke of such a level that you're saying, well, in order to get the ROI that I require going forward and my investors require going forward, we offer 6%, so that's not insignificant. You have to charge X. But then when the distortions in the supply chain, like a rubber band, spring back, and we have all of this overbuilding, they're building out of extremely expensive land costs, they're requiring an ROI, they're raising rents. John, you gave me a number on the rental rate increase.
It's 10.5% overall,
yeah.
But it's really 20% in most markets like Stephanie manages.
And I think you mentioned, John, is in an article in the Wall Street Journal, if anyone has seen it, about this, and also there was a phrase, sticker shock. Well, when people like Duke and ourselves, or investors, are basing their development decisions on a long-term duration, and that accommodative policy, we're going to get tapering, the interest rates are going to go up, all of a sudden they're requiring X in terms of their return. But now the built-in inflation is structural, and there's a lot of building. So you have a lot more of overbuilding in certain markets, not all. I know John said there's 500 million square feet of net absorption in the country.
Just about, yeah.
Okay, so certain markets, not sure if Houston's one of them, but in certain markets there will be overbuilding. Their land costs are high. That translates into high rents. And then how is that structural increase going to work its way through the system? The structural inflation, which then becomes not transitory. That is one example how through the supply chain we now have intransitive inflation.
So I agree with you. Inflation right now is not transitive. It's probably
becoming
fairly
structural.
static, and it's becoming structural.
Yeah.
But it also so happens that vacancy is at a record low rate, 3.6%. We've never seen a number like that in our business. The pipeline is 450 million square feet. That's a lot. That's half a year. Problem is right now it takes much more than half a year to finish a building because there's not adequate supply, there's no cement. I mean,
That's right. Yeah.
Your development group has a hard time getting materials, right? So I think what's different this time, first of all, we as a fiscal economy have sort of taken cycles out of the economy. Yes. We don't like to see cycles anymore, but it's also true that everything that drives industrial right now is here for a longer period of time.
The digitization.
So what happened in 07, 08,
That's right.
it just couldn't happen, at least not in the near term at this point. E-commerce, transportation costs, population migration, all of those things that are fundamentally different, those are still middle innings kinds of concepts.
So John, where do you see people adding square footage and what markets are they looking at? If to, CJ's point, some markets might be oversaturated.
So classically, 15 years ago, there were kind of 6 gateway markets, the biggest markets we all knew, Atlanta, New Jersey, et cetera. There's now 25, I would call tier 1, tier 2 markets. Because first of all, as population moves out from the urban core, which is happening, sorry to say that in New York, LA, but people are leaving big cities and moving into something more urban, more ex-urban or suburban. Those markets also need Duke to build on building so that they can get their stuff later on the same day, right? So you have to be closer to people, and as people move, so there's a core growth of what we used to call non-core markets that I think also has a healthy runway. That's the Greenvilles, the Charlottes, the El Pasos, Columbus, Ohio, all very good markets that you, as an investor, maybe you weren't that comfortable with 10 years ago. You're comfortable with your yield in that market today.
In fact, segueing from that, I just spoke to a group of investment managers who were debating the thesis of future investment along the Norfolk Southern merger line, which will be the first intermodal freight Canada to Mexico. And there are a lot of underpriced markets along that new rail freight. First of all, the merger was held up because there was competitive, but now that it is set, I think that there are a lot of potential value markets that are soon going to be the next Greenville, Columbus, tier 2 cities that are already hot.
Yep.
What markets are those?
Now you're asking for my entire thesis.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And that's all right.
But you do have this mantra called smaller, closer, colder. Can you explain that a little bit and maybe how that feeds into what markets you might be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we're not going to compete as in our size and our cost of capital with Duke in the regional large-scale dry box. It's just not possible. I mean, we do have certain competencies in urban gateways where apparently people are fleeing. I actually am one of them, so I agree with John. So we believe, though, that the smaller, closer, colder of climate-controlled facilities, as the population puts a premium on health, all kinds of health, there's going to be more consideration of organic. The 20-year-ago promise of what organic food and artisanal and farm-to-table, which was mostly marketing 20 years, is now happening. And in order to do that for Sprouts, for Erewhon, for even Kroger, for now Whole Foods owned by Amazon, Publix, the Jenkins family right here, in order to do that, you cannot build a sustainable network back of house in existing grocery supermarkets. Land costs for that, for one reason, is why you can't. So you're going to have micro-fulfillment from climate-controlled facilities throughout cities and along over-the-road freight locations, but much closer than regional giant boxes.
CJ, are you looking to build those on spec or build-to-suits in tow?
Good question. I would love to say build-to-suit, but when you start a new concept, it's going to be spec. But we're doing, that's why I asked you before in the green room about repurposing and Duke's emphasis on redevelopment or transitioning versus ground up. Build-to-suit spec. We're actually, one of the ways, we're doing mostly redevelopment. It's the only way that's cost-effective in the markets that we're looking at where there's MSA populations of 1 million plus, right? So barely tier 2, but so one thing we're doing in the redevelopment is we're taking parking garages. We own about 50 parking garages, and we are part of a network that manages over 1,000, like a hospitality brand. During the pandemic, the average occupancy, space occupied in those large structured parking blocks was 12%. 12%.
Right.
Huge swaths of space available.
Yeah.
SoftBank, actually, one of the things I think they actually got right, is they invested $1 billion in a Florida company that was a software company called Reef. Actually, it was called something Park Jockey before. Just a software company, and they're now investing, changing these to what we coined before that, mobility hubs. That means that these large, well-located, structured parking garages, they'll park cars, they'll park EV, there'll be destination hubs for EV for the Hertz 50,000 Teslas they're going to buy. There'll be the Rivians from Amazon. There'll be Amazon lockers, and on the top, there will be cold storage pods for a variety of small to medium-sized food distribution.
Interesting.
Yeah. John, what do you think of mobility hubs? I mean, how does that figure into what you're seeing sort of on the street from tenant demand? Do you see demand for this product?
Yeah, I do. So I think similar.
I thought I had it, but I did not do it. Oh, sorry.
Somebody shut my mic off. I'm kidding. There are similar concepts under development that are more retail focused. They're mobility hubs in the sense of delivery and fulfillment. So the concept is think of sort of a strip mall look of several destination stores with a few showroom items, but really they're there for you to get service and receive your delivery. Along the back will be, call it a ghost kitchen, but a place that can cook for every restaurant that's front-facing to the customers. There will be lockers and kiosks for people to pick up from, and those will be replenished during the day. And then there will be probably some type of a 3PL, either maybe backside of the lot or adjacent, that will do a lot of the shipping and receiving for the retailers involved.
Right.
And then finally, there will be some kind of a cold box so that those 7 restaurants can get their replenishment to cook during the day. There's a couple of developers working on concepts like that. It's new, and they're trying to figure out where to go. What's a growing market for that kind of a concept? It's clearly more often probably a rim suburb, so not the urban core where people are leaving and land's expensive, but something 5 miles out.
Gotcha.
With a good volume of shoppers that like to shop that way, so younger than I am, but also a good volume of higher earning households who are available to shop that way, who have that kind of means.
Actually, the pricing for, I would say, off-market, not off-market, off-thoroughfare strip malls, B, C, even Class C, stabilized for that very reason. I mean, we were talking about retail.
To be repurposed, yeah.
Yeah, totally. They were in total free fall. Frankly, couldn't give one away. A strip mall that had maybe 50% occupancy and was a little bit of a distance away from an MSA, but not too far. This concept that I'm talking about, parking garages and just translated into a strip mall, is going to change their entire potential investment horizon.
Yep.
So CJ, you kind of jumped the gun on the innovation question, but innovations, no, you're fine. So what kind of innovations have come out of the pandemic as a result of the rise of e-commerce? And John, you were talking a little earlier about retailers and what retailers might do with their mobility hubs of sorts, in the future. What has changed, and what do you see sort of being picked up as innovations along the way that have worked so far?
Yeah, so when we had our prep call yesterday, great call, we talked about innovation, and at least I'll say for me, I don't see a tremendous amount of new innovation in warehousing, right? To be clear, robotics isn't new, automated storage and retrieval is not new. It's more highly adopted, but not new. What I think the new innovation is in the next 5 years is getting much better for retailers at doing actual ship from store. So there are some retailers that are really good at treating some of their stores like warehouses and shipping from store. Best Buy in particular. Apple has a goal that half of all their e-com shipments will be actually shipped from the store. The innovation that is required for that to really happen better is inventory visibility and tracking. You would think every retailer knows where all their stuff is. They significantly do not. So before they can guarantee that when you order that purple sweater that they have one on the shelf, they can't ask you to hold on the computer while they go check, right? Their inventory accuracy has to be much greater than it is today. So I think there will be innovators coming into the space, which actually is some form of an algorithm or a what's it called?
Predictive
analytics.
Yeah.
Around whether or not the inventory exists. That's going to be required to really move forward in I bought online, I'm going to ship from store, I'm going to pick up from store, I'm going to get it shipped from Duke's warehouse. To really have all those options available,
Right.
we have to know where the stuff is a little better.
So it needs investment in technology and a lot of stuff behind the scenes that don't necessarily have to do with real estate, but, last mile.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It actually does what he was talking about,
Okay.
and I have a version of that. So there are there are two that we invested in that are using blockchain solutions, decentralized solutions to and sort of an in-network edge computing to determine not just predictive, but to have real-time inventory of the highest order. And they are very close to being able to install those in large-scale retailers first, given the type of cloud solutions they're already utilizing.
Sure.
But I think the real difference is that if that is going to happen, better inventory management, whatever technology you're going to use, is going to change your real estate footprint.
Right.
It is going to change your real estate footprint. It is going to make certain markets not all the same box. Certain markets are going to get larger in terms of what their formulaic box is, and certain are going to get smaller and more same-day delivery.
Right.
And become more micro-fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Stephanie was talking about, how there's been sort of the rise of demand for that last mile and, what you're talking about, CJ. But, there's also real estate issues to that where, a lot of these last mile delivery facilities are in these urban environments or even, near urban environments where there's a constraint on land. How are you kind of navigating that issue, Stephanie, as this has sort of become more and more of a problem versus less of a problem?
Right. I mean, let's face it, pre-pandemic, when you had Amazon Prime, you expected your package to get there overnight, right? And then the pandemic and the supply chain issues, now Prime is like 2 days, sometimes it's 3, even if you live in a large urban, MSA, like here in South Florida. So there is much more demand, like John said, people are putting smaller warehouses where there are rooftops of consumers because we have that instant gratification driving our shopping habits. The pandemic fueled that. We clicked a button, it showed up at our house, we didn't have to go anywhere. You don't revert so easily. That behavior is here to stay. So now the retailers are looking for footprints all over. So in all of the urban core and the peripheral and the suburbs, they want a footprint because their transportation costs, their time to transport, how many turns a day can they do, how many laps can the drivers do per load. So it's put an increased demand on shrinking coverage. So when you buy a site, if you're putting a last mile facility of maybe 100,000 square feet, you might need a 25-acre piece of land to accommodate that, where normally we could put, more than double that much square footage on the site in South Florida, for example. So as those land costs are driven up, which they have been tremendously, I mean, we've seen more than double in price in Florida in the last 3 years. As those costs go up, you have to accommodate for that if you're just paving it and not charging rent under the roof. So we're seeing a lot of playing with how do we account for that lost rental revenue to accommodate the parking demands for this particular customer. So
There's real-time, I mean, anecdotal, but I know of these leases. Amazon themselves have rented 2 sub 15,000 square foot units in New York City, and they've rented a 18,000 square foot, several of them in that size in Boston. Heretofore, 3 years ago, if it was less than 100, they wouldn't even pick up the phone. So that is a real-time difference of, now I have a predilection for cold, but smaller, closer, colder, but smaller, closer will take out the cold.
That's right.
Given what you were saying, is
Yeah.
exactly, I think, a significant movement. I think it's actually barbell. I know Duke especially, and John has a lot of experience dealing in really large tenants and boxes. I think they're going to get larger. They're going to get more regional and intermodal, but the mid-size they're going to lose ground. And then you're going to have the other end of the barbell, which is the closer, colder or otherwise, smaller and closer, nearer the population, so those drivers can make a number of turns and not have to work 10, 12 hours shifts.
yeah.
Right. And Stephanie, you said the competition's been so fierce, you've had to walk away from deals that you...
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've walked away. It's more, I think it's more just being very disciplined. And, you know, CJ referenced it earlier, there are going to be some people who are sort of making some hasty decisions here, paying a premium for land, construction costs continue to rise. You know, it takes, in some of these tier 1 markets, looking at the West Coast, looking at South Florida, looking at Northern New Jersey, the entitlement time period is extensive. So when you buy a site, you're not really putting shovels into the ground, sometimes for 18 months. So you're holding on to that on your balance sheet, waiting until you can go vertical, and then, you know, nobody really knows where the market will be when it's ready to be leased, right? So I think it's just a focus on what we're really good at, in each of the different markets where we have a presence across the country, and just being extremely aware of what our risks are. And sometimes you place your bet and you win, and you hope that that happens most of the time. So it's really not so much walking away from deals, but looking at them and saying, okay, the scale of this might be a little too much for right now. Let's go back to looking at some more infill opportunities or some redevelopment plays. So it's just being selective.
Yeah,
Right.
you had a fun redevelopment deal that you mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Sure. 3 years ago, we purchased a site in Medley, which is here in Miami, for those who aren't local, and it was 35 acres, and it was an active lumber yard. And we worked closely with a broker who got us in conversations with the lumberyard owner and operator, and they were willing to sell, so we acquired the site 3 years ago. They leased it back from us for a couple of years while we went through all of the design and permitting and working with the environmental remediation that had to be done, because it was a brownfield site. And when they vacated, we went in with bulldozers and leveled it, and so we now have about 725,000 square feet of Class A distribution space on the site. One building is fully leased. It was actually pre-leased prior to completion. And then we've had tremendous activity on the 500,000 square foot cross-dock. We do have a lease outstanding. We'll see if it signs. No deal is done until it's inked, so you didn't hear this from me today. But it's been great.
Gotcha.
It's been a fun project to work on, and the land price is there. So we paid $1 million an acre 3 years ago. Today, that site would trade for easily $2.5 million an acre.
Well, that's the reason you bought something with hair on it. And
Right.
we're willing to do the brownfields
Right.
was because of value.
That's
and
right.
the other
Well, value and proximity, right? I mean,
Right.
proximity towards population centers and employment centers are important. John, you had mentioned that, you know, there's almost there's more jobs out there in terms of industrial jobs. A lot of these big third-party logistics providers are having a hard time filling it. Can you talk a little bit about the employment end and the proximity and the importance
Yeah.
of real estate there?
Yeah, for sure. So first, regarding the prior question about it being competitive, there is so much capital that wants to be placed, right? There's so much capital that wants to go into the ground somewhere, using folks like these to get it into the ground, right? it's almost at a level where it's insatiable, obviously, right? And in the past, an institutional investor, let's say a life co or a pension fund, they might have had 15% of their capital dedicated towards industrial. That's at least 50% today on average. Everyone wants into the space. There's new forms of capital. There's capital coming from offshore. And sometimes people might do a bad deal. Not Stephanie, because Stephanie would never do a bad deal.
She's got discipline, yes.
And so if I'm one of those new forms of capital coming into a place like Miami, and I'm competing with Duke Realty, who knows what they're talking about, to me, that's where there's risk. And that's where maybe some of the structural issues you're talking about can become risk for an investor if they're not really diligent about what they're looking for. And part of that might be in labor. So looking for a site that's going to be able to attract the workforce it needs from 30 minutes or shorter away. People don't want to go as far anymore. Here in Florida, that would get you a couple miles, I guess. You need to be sure that there's a sustainable labor market for the next 5 to 10 years before you sign that lease. So if you're a Duke, you're trying to make sure you understand what the labor market is, because while unemployment might be 3 to 5 to 6% in most markets overall, in the top 20 industrial real estate markets, in every one of them, the warehousing unemployment rate is higher than the average. And in some markets, it's 15%. So it appears to me like some of those folks don't want that job anymore. So maybe we haven't paid them enough, maybe it's been hard work. But the unemployment rate for folks that have been in the warehouse business before and are out of it now, in many markets is above 10%. In some markets it's 15%, and it's always higher than average. And as part of the structural change to supply chain, I think we're going to see those jobs have to pay more. It means our Cheerios are going to cost more in the future, but we're going to have to pay.
Is it pure payment, or is it, I mean, can landlords, property owners do something to sort of sway their decision?
It's also who the employer is. So I don't know, I don't believe what percentage of, or you're an owner-operator, but I'm sure you're doing triple net leases. You're not employing the warehouse staff. So yes, the availability of that labor in the market is something that needs to be underwritten by the developer / owner operator. But in terms of the execution and solution, that's where I think most of their conclusions end. Then it's up to Amazon, it's up to UPS, it's up to Target, it's up to whomever your super regional tenancy is to figure out their employment plan, and if they're going to meet a minimum wage like Walmart and increase it up to a point that's going to attract labor to what is not an easy job. But that's why I don't see labor pool underwriting it to attract a tenant, yes, but then the solution of that I don't see is in the purview of the industrial industry.
Well, I think it also depends, when you're evaluating a site for future development, who do you really want to attract? Some people don't want to do business with the giant e-commerce folks because they can be fairly demanding.
It's a bond. I don't, for that reason. They want 10 years, no rental increases. You basically are parking money, which, by the way, you touched on something I didn't want to interrupt before. Is exactly what I was going to say. The froth in the industrial sector is not from Duke and Prolog, maybe Prolog just a little bit, but not from those kind of owner-operators. It's from capital allocators who have never been in industrial before. Right. And what it is, they may say, I'm in a life co, I want to be in industrial because it's a hot market. That's not where the real money is coming from. It's coming from people from capital allocators, large pools, who are hedging inflation, and it's a parking strategy. They're like, I'm in industrial today, but tomorrow I'm going to be in something else. I don't even know what industrial. I'm going to give it to an operator, maybe Duke, maybe someone else. They're their own owner-operator, but there are others. I'm just moving large sums around the world to find a return that is safe, not put it in German bunds and get a negative 3%, 30 basis points, excuse me.
Right,
so,
lots of diversification in terms of investment going around the world.
So the real froth, and by the way, they'll do bad deals because they're like, well, as long as I don't lose money, I have to figure out how to return 6% minimum. That's an entirely different world. It's an entirely different world between me and Duke. in terms of cost of capital. But the real froth that John sees are from Johnny-come-lately is not really fair, but it's about allocators who are not looking for long-term relationships in a specific asset class. They're here, they're now, inflation, tapering, increases, I'll go there, or I'll put it in treasuries, I'll put it in euro bonds, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'll just sell my industrial. Did I break even? Fine, that was good enough, that's better than not losing. That's not in the industrial sector. That's the capital allocation sector. Unfortunately, that group is distorting what they do.
And I'm just going to circle.
Good for John, though.
I'm just going
It's really good for John.
Brokerage is good right now.
Yeah.
I'm just going to circle back. John, we were talking about, unemployment. We were talking about what landlords, property owners are doing, and what you've kind of seen on the ground. Can you talk a little bit about what people are doing with their real estate in order to help their tenants with maybe some of the employment issues they may have?
Yeah, that's a place where we are early innings. To be an employer of choice is a complicated topic, right? It's many things there, right? But it's also your workplace. And so we are seeing many of our tenant occupiers try to become employers of choice, and part of that is the facility itself. It's certainly a comfortable place to work, so air conditioning. It's the workstation itself where you have some space and you're safe, and there's plastic shields and so forth. It's also, in the course of a day, trying to mix up the job. So instead of 8 hours of pick, pack, and ship, it's 4 hours of this and 4 hours of that. So I think you're seeing a lot more attention being paid to that experience for that employee. I think part of it is now amenitizing, which can be food, it can be daycare, it can be jogging trails, it can be a fitness center, it can be lockers, it can be a study hall and quiet places. So, because many of these folks work this part-time and they do something else for the rest of their time, like be a student or take care of people. So I think the amenitizing concept is somewhat new because it hasn't been as competitive of a market to get tenants because people just need the space. But I do think, especially maybe as vacancy might grow, not anytime soon, and as the workforce gets harder and harder to attract, you'll see more amenitizing. My younger daughter, bless her heart, she's 21, she said to me the other day, Dad, our generation just isn't going to take those crappy jobs from you guys unless we really like them. Okay. So, and you can't quote her on that, by the way, and I realize I'm in a room of media.
Isn't this on Twitter?
But I think that's, in buildings, that's one of the places where employers can do better, is to be an employee.
I want to suppose that follow up on that. I mean, CBRE is a tremendous research arm. I love your reports. And Stephanie, do you guys have any real-time data on what the increase to both the build cost and also the operating cost that this amenitization is creating?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have any stats on that handy because it's usually something that falls to the tenant. If they're amenitizing their space, putting a gym in or a big cafeteria or things like that, that's typically what we would consider an above standard improvement. Fully air conditioning a warehouse in Miami, that's an above standard improvement. Believe it or not, I would say 85% of the warehouses in South Florida are not air conditioned. I mean, and it is hot here.
There's a very easy competitive differentiator right there.
But it's a tremendous investment. It's expensive to maintain. But with COVID, we've seen some of our tenants who are in manufacturing who have made that investment after the fact because of safety reasons and because they need to keep their productivity going and be safe and provide a comfortable working environment for their employees. I think so as far as quantifying it, I wouldn't really know how to do that. Yeah. I would say that we're seeing an uptick of that in areas, let's say like Columbus, where you've got large parks filled with bombers, big 1 million square foot buildings, distribution centers, where they're employing a tremendous number of people every day. And what each organization is doing is pilfering from their neighbor. They're, oh, hey, I'll pay you 50 cents more an hour. So I think we're seeing a lot more of that in those particular distribution markets, not so much like South Florida, where it's more of an infill environment, I mean, we've got 20 miles of developable land between the ocean and the Everglades, so everything is sort of infill.
Well, it's also a public policy because in some states, New York being one, there's air quality standards that are now, you have to put
Right.
into new builds. So
Which costs a lot more to develop.
a lot more. Like I
More
mentioned,
air changes per hour, I mean, so many different things.
we're about to do 2 million square feet in a prime Jersey corridor, and what we just did the underwriting on the build, we're looking at about 25% over 3 years, from 3 years ago. A 25% increase, partially because of the, not really amenities, I wouldn't call them amenities, these are regulated air quality standards that are now law. So, and it's not a pass on because this is spec, surprisingly, and it's a 30% difference. But now that's
But
yet
your
another
rents-
issue of structural inflation.
Rents are 60% higher in that
Right.
area too.
That's right.
From 3 years ago. So,
That's true.
it's a lever system.
Right, right. But Stephanie, I think you may have been telling me this, but, there's been on-site daycare, there's been, food trucks, and apologies if, John, if you mentioned this to me, but, there's a lot more amenities now. Is that something Duke is looking to offer, as you guys move forward on some projects?
No, I think most of our customers, when they come to us and say, this is what our needs are, they communicate that up front. We're not offering that up front. I think one of the things that we look at is, quality of life is important for our customers' employees. It's important to all of us, right? So when you're looking at things like infrastructure around a site or a building, and are the roadways adequate for 500 employees to leave in 1 hour at the end of their day? Or are they going to be sitting in traffic just outside of their building, idling, waiting, trying to get home? I think we look at more things like that. How attractive is this going to be long-term on the things that we can control? So I would say we pay more attention to things like big picture things like that, rather than getting down into the smaller on-site amenities.
That might come at a later date when things get more competitive or you're not in development mode or something.
Right.
Yeah.
But what percentage of your build, your current or near term, is spec and the remainder being built to suit?
That's an excellent question, and I don't have the exact stat on that. I do know that our spec development is up 75% year over year from last year.
So it's increasing, but we don't know what the baseline start was.
No, I don't have that.
Because then that's your decisions, or that's your analytics to determine what amenities, what are we going to put in standard, what's going to be the operating cost, versus that decision being your known tenant.
Right.
CJ, one of the things you look for in real estate is power, and power grids are really important to you. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, that's again a climate controlled, a bit of an anomaly. Power is important to all operators of large warehouse. For climate controlled or cold storage, it's far more important. And unless you're doing those super small boxes, if you're doing anything of scale, underwriting the power grid and the cost of operations is paramount. It's actually as important as the labor pool, because if our tenants, or us, depending on the lease structure, if they cannot afford, or if it's insufficient and there is insufficient backup, or they have to create their own power station, that leads to problems in the investment. That leads to problems in the sustainability. So we became much more knowledgeable about the state of the power grid in this country than we ever intended to be 2 or 3 years ago when we started. We've studied, sustainability. We're looking at Midwest cold. That includes a lot of solar. We're looking at Pacific Northwest wind. That's potential to supplement the existing power grid. Upstate New York, upstate New York, and in far northeast Maine, there's a lot of old mills. So you have hydropower. So in order to get the climate-controlled cold storage network to where this country expects to get live food, organic food, within a reasonable period of time that does not negate their benefits, we need a tremendously different power grid. It's not possible right now. And I think, frankly, that's one of the issues Whole Foods is having right now I think they looked at their existing distribution and did not realize that the country, our infrastructure, is not ready for where they wanted to be, for what they want to build. I'm speaking about Amazon when they made the Whole Foods acquisition. There's a lot of choke points in that relationship right now. They own them. That they're realizing we're out of their control. Whether a local power grid can support a monster new back of house or regional cold storage facility for the available utility. Long Island has a terrible electric utility. I'm sorry if anyone's here from Long Island or is related to anyone who works for the utility, but it's a problem, and we cannot. And we were looking at one, and we backed away for that very reason. So there is a lot of economic activity that's being stifled by our electrical utility infrastructure.
Right, right. Stephanie, you have a lot of knowledge here in Florida, and there's been a lot of competition for land, for projects, for everything else. Do you see yourself partnering up with, a capital source or anything like that on projects? Does Duke have any plans to do any joint ventures in the future?
I think we would be most likely the capital source.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We've had some conversations with some local developers
Yes.
who are very active in the market, and sometimes there may be opportunities for us to do something together. Historically, we haven't been a joint venture partner in many deals. There have been a few one-offs here and there. In Indianapolis, we had a large one, but I believe that's been, that and another one, but Browning.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that any option is open for discussion.
In the green room, you said you were dying to get into New Jersey.
Well, we're in New Jersey.
I know.
We've got a big presence in New Jersey.
I mean, in a specific 2 million square foot development.
There you go.
Raising capital is not as hard as it used to be in the
Right.
industrial space.
There's so much money out there, like John said. I mean, people are just looking to place their capital, and any local developer who wants to move forward with a deal can make any number of phone calls and have people clamoring to do the deal.
But are you interested? Is Duke interested?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would be interested for the right opportunity. And we do pride ourselves in having strong relationships with the local development community and our friendly competitors like Prologis and others. And, I think good relationships make everyone successful. So I think we would certainly be all ears and see if we could figure something out that benefited both groups.
Gotcha. So last question here, and for all panelists, if you just want to keep it to maybe 30 seconds or less, no pressure. But where is the next evolution of the supply chain headed? And Stephanie, do you want to get us kicked off there?
Oh my goodness.
Or we can go. CJ's ready. Let's let CJ go.
I think I've actually answered this question a couple times already in the panel. Micro-fulfillment. Smaller, closer, colder, and I was only talking about grocery, but we all know the tragedy of the last 2 years, healthcare, pharma. That, unfortunately, depending on your opinion, that I believe is the steady state going forward. And there is going to be a radical transformation on the distribution of food and pharmaceuticals. And our system and the infrastructure to do that is going to have to change also dramatically. So that's where I think is going to happen, and I think it's going to start hopefully in 2022, because otherwise we're way behind the curve.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, so one of them is the concept in retail we talked about, which is getting better at getting you your shop-for goods from any location. I think another one is micro-fulfillment, which is maybe that 10,000 square foot kind of robot module in the back of the store that has a lot of refrigeration in it that will automatically pick maybe the groceries, which Kroger is investing heavily in, but will replace some of the labor that might be harder to get in the future and also might be harder to get in a dense environment, like in a city where these robotic boxes will make sense. And I think another one is an even better use of alternative forms of energy. As a country, one of the hardest parts of our grid is not being able to store power, right?
Good point.
There's not enough batteries in this country, right? For us to generate power from water or from light or from gas, store it to use later. So I think we'll see some larger industrial parks have the capability to generate and to store so that the users in the park can leverage the power that came from within the park itself.
Yeah, makes sense. Stephanie?
I agree with everything that my fellow panelists said, but I also think that, we've seen a rise in the square footage that our tenants are taking over time, and I think that with the spike in e-commerce coming out of the pandemic, I think we'll see bigger buildings, even bigger than what we've seen already, more infill development being done, so I think there's going to be a lot of repurposing, redeveloping, possibly going vertical. There was a big article in the Real Deal recently about multi-story warehouse. It's something that New York is sort of getting their hands around now. Seattle, there was a building that Prologis developed. But I think that we'll start to see a little more of that adoption in the next, 5 to 10 years. There's some stuff going on here in Miami right now that I'm hearing rumblings about, so I think that we'll start to see some more of that.
I know you said 30 seconds, very true. I was actually going to ask you that before about what percentage of any multi-story either of you. Very tricky. We had a deal with Skinell to do just that on 12 acres in New York City. It takes expense and building
That's right.
and foundation to whole new levels.
Yeah.